Hey there, my fellow nerds. And you know why we have got Thomas Carlyle on our radar today? Because the UGC NET English exam loves throwing questions about him, especially his works and the order he wrote them in. It's like Carlyle's works are on the hot seat every single time you attempt the exam. But don't worry, we have covered you with our 100 most expected topics that we are these days discussing. In our previous classes, we have talked about Dryden, we talked about Sydney, we also talked about English in India and a couple of more topics. And today, as you can see over your screen, today we are going to discuss Thomas Carlyle. So, all my nerd school family, let's talk about Thomas Carlyle. And we'll start with his biography and literary career. First of all, when we start anything, what I usually say, write hi in the chat box or in the comment, and don't forget to like the video, because one like will light a fire in me to make more videos, and that you should do. Anyway, Thomas Carlyle, who is the Scottish historian and essayist, and this dude was born way back in 1795 and lived until 1881. You can see the date 1795 to 1881. You need to remember the date because in exam they only ask about the chronological order of the particular author, and also they ask about the order of the work in chronological manner. So that's where this class will be focused on. And now we can just move to the biography. As we know, he's a Scottish historian and essayist, and he was influenced by Calvinist upbringing and family. And as we know, he wrote some epic stuff like the French Revolution that you get questions most of the time, right? On heroes and hero worship and the heroic in the history, which was published in 1841. They ask the question based on that too. And the history of Frederick II of Prussia, called Frederick the Great, which is the largest work of his, Carlyle's, and which is like in massive 6-volume from 1858 to 1865. But before all these things, we'll discuss anyway in the different slide. Right now, we'll just talk about his life. So Carlyle's dad, whose name is James Carlyle, was a skilled mason turned farmer, and he was super religious, a hardcore Calvinist. His belief, had a major impact on Thomas Carlyle, who had a big, loving family with 8 siblings and a super cool mom. In his early days, Thomas went to school in Ecclefechan and then Anna Academy, but he got picked on there, which wasn't kind of fun. Later, he went to the University of Edinburgh in 1809, where he studied all sorts of stuff without really focusing on one thing. Right? That kind of thing happens when you're youth, when you want to do so many things and you can't focus in one thing. And I think it happened to everybody in some stage of their life, right? So here with Carlyle, his dad wanted him to become a minister. And this also can be applied in your or others' life, that you always come across these kind of things. Like my father wanted to become a lawyer, but I ended up becoming what? A teacher, right? So these kind of thing happens. And tell me, write in the chat box what your parents wanted to be and what you are now, or are you just following their footsteps? So write in the chat box if you're there, or in the comments. Anyway, I would love to answer that. If you're watching this, you should write something in the chat box or comment so I can answer that, and we'll just engage together, right? And that's the fun way to learn anything, and especially when it is about like 100 most expected topic. For that, we need to really focus every bit of it, because one question is quite important, right, in the exam. But anyway, let's move on. As he was very, actually really good at math, and in 1814 he scored a teaching gig in Annan, and then in 1816 he moved to Kirkcaldy, where he met the awesome preacher and mystic Edward Irving. And that character is important, that figure in his work, and that we'll talk about. Anyway, these two hit at a big time, and Carlyle was like, thanks to Irving, I finally understood what true friendship means. Even after Irving moved to London and became a famous preacher, they stayed best friends. So after those initial tough years, Carlyle realized that teaching is not his jam. So he ditched it, and then in 1819 he went back to the University of Edinburgh to study law. But man, those 3 years were a total disaster for him. He felt all alone, questioning the meaning of life, and even gave up on becoming a minister. He did some tutoring and writing to make ends meet, but money was tight. And he felt life, he felt like he was on his own little island. So around 1821, something changed inside him. And that change also can happen to you in some stage, right? And around in 1821, what changed in him? He was like a total transformation, we can see, which he later fictionalized in his work called Sartor Resarted. And UGC NET really loves this, topic. They ask question based on that every single time. So it was kind of odd though, because it wasn't your typical love for God things, but rather this intense hatred for the devil that took over his mind. Some people doubt if everything went down exactly as he described it, but that's just Carlyle being Carlyle, right? And he was always wrestling with his inner demons. And that also happens, with us too. So during these tough years, he also got into German literature, and especially admiring Goethe like crazy. And in 1824, he even translated Goethe's Wilhelm Meister apprenticeship. Tell me how many of you know about that Wilhelm Meister apprenticeship? If you know, write in the chat box. And if you know the story, can you just write in one single sentence the plot? Right. But anyway, meanwhile, his life was all over the place, going from one short tutoring to another, moving from Edinburgh to Dunkeld and who knows where else, right? All right, so it's time to take a trip way back in October 17, 1826, when Carlyle tied the knot with Jane Welch. He got married to Jane Welch. She was one sharp and good looking girl, but boy, could she get fiery sometime. A real daddy girls from Haddington. They'd known each other for 5 years, and their letters revealed all the worries and money problems they faced before getting married. And what's fascinating is that Mr. Carlyle, who usually acted all high and mighty, turned into softy when wooing Jane. But don't be fooled. Once they were married, he became quite the grumpy and difficult husband. Despite their deep love for each other, they had their fair share of fights and misunderstanding. No doubt, right? It happens with every married couples. And if it didn't happen to you, you're so lucky, by the way. Anyway, leave it. Now, in the early days of marriage, they mostly lived in Craigenputtoch, which is in Dumfriesshire. Carlyle was hustling again, writing for one Edinburgh Review and working on this book called Sartor Resartus. And let me tell you, getting that book published wasn't a walk in the park. It's a wild mix of his own life story and German philosophy, packed with bitterness and humor. The main idea he's trying to get across is that the old ways of thinking are outdated and we need some fresh perspective to match the times. But honestly, he's a bit vague about what those new ideas should be. So this dude moved to London in 1834 with his wife, hoping to score some cool writing jobs, but things weren't going in his way. And he was basically broke, running out of savings. But guess what? He didn't give up. Instead of settling for less, Carlyle took a massive project, which is like writing a super ambitious work called The French Revolution. And he got lots of sources material from his friend John Stuart Mill, who was also thinking of writing a similar book, but Carlyle convinced him to let him take on the task. Now, here everything gets very exciting and interesting. In 1835, Carlyle gave a chunk of the manuscript to Mill to check out, right? But guess what happened? Disaster struck. Mill's servant accidentally burned the whole thing. Can you imagine the hard work? The heartbreak that he had. Imagine if you have just spent like hours, writing something, especially in computer or anywhere, and you suddenly lose the content. You'll be heartbroken, right? But you can imagine Carlyle writing for so many years about this work and that got burned by a servant. What would you feel? You'll be heartbroken and also furious. But you know what? Carlyle could have, as we know, if I was there, I would have just, you know, beat him up. But anyway, Carlyle is something different. He depended on writing to survive. So he'd been working his butt off for months, but instead he stayed calm and consoled with, Mill, who was totally distraught that night. He even sent him a super nice letter showing how forgiving and cool Carlyle was. Oh man, you're kind of different, I can imagine. Anyway, see, this dude was used to dealing with big, intense problems, like his constant struggle with sadness and frustration. His life wasn't as tragic as he wanted it to be, so he dove, into historical research, choosing topics that has some epic divine drama. But wait, the story is not over. Carlyle didn't give up on this particular book. He worked like crazy to rewrite it, and his buddy Mill even gave him some cash to help him out. Finally, in 1837, he finished what? The French Revolution, and guess what? It was a massive hit. Everyone loved it, and Carlyle became super famous. He even got invited to give lectures, which sorted out his money trouble. So Carlyle had this cool idea about writing, history being like a divine scripture. He looked at the French Revolution as a big old judgment on the dumb monarchy and nobility. And man, did he back it up with tons of well documented details and some seriously fiery writing. The dude could be all serious and gloomy 1 minute and then crack a joke on the next. So in one part, he described his fancy assembly sitting on a shaky ground, surrounded by time, eternity, and all sorts of craziness. They were doing their best, given what they had to deal with. Now, in his book called Chartism, that question that has recently asked, and if you have attended the previous exam, the question was based on Chartism. So Carlyle got all riled up against normal economic theories. But the funny thing is he mixed together radical and conservative stuff. So it got a confusing, little bit. But then he wrote this book about heroes and hero worship, where he praised strong people with a sense of divine purpose. He talked about heroes being like gods, prophets, poets, priests, writers, and kings. Carlyle totally geeked out about poets, especially Dante, seeing way more in them than others did. Anyway, later on he wrote another book called The Past and Present, and he took us back to the medieval and compared it to the messy 19th century. He liked the medieval abbots' wise and strong leadership, even though he wasn't into strict Christianity or the Catholic Church. So Carlyle was totally into Cromwell, so he wrote this huge book called Oliver Cromwell's Letter and Speeches with elucidation in 1845. Then in 1850 he went on all savage and wrote later day pamphlets, like he was all fired up about how the new 19th century prisons were coddling the worst dude. And the guy couldn't lie, yet he kind of had this weird habit of seeing only what he wanted to see. Later he got all geeky about Frederick the Great and wrote the history of Frederick II of Prussia, called Frederick the Great, between 1858 and 1865. And he wasn't a fan of universal suffrage, thinking it would lead to total anarchy, and he dissed on the whole parliamentary eloquence and free press. So back in 1865, he got offered a cool job as the head at the University of Edinburgh when he gave his speech during his installation in April 1866. It wasn't mind-blowing, but people loved how he preached and about being all morally upright and stuff. Instant success, right? But then tragedy struck. His wife Jane Carlyle suddenly passed away in London, so she got buried in Haddington, and Thomas wrote a touching epitaph for her in the church. From that point on, Carlyle was never the same. He spent the next 15 years feeling worn out, bored, and kind of secluded from the world. Still, he got fired up about a few causes. He fought for Governor Edward John Eyre of Jamaica, who got sacked for being too harsh while putting down a black uprising in 1865. Carlyle was like, Ayer did the right thing, saved the West Indies, and hanged the troublemaker. Totally deserved it. He also got pumped up during the Franco-German War in 1870-71, saying Germany should be the boss of Europe. But you know how it goes, right? And in his last years, he didn't write much. But he did manage to put some works. In 1875, he dropped The Early Kings of Norway and an essay about John Knox's portrait. Then in 1881, he published a reminiscence later. Later, he got into editing his wife's letter, and those got published in 1883 under the title Letters and Memoirs of Jane Wells Carlyle and prepared for publication by Thomas Carlyle. And fun fact, even though they offered him a spot in Westminster Abbey for his final resting place, Carlyle said, "No, I want to be buried next to my parents in Ecclefechan." And that's exactly where they laid him in the rest. And so, here you have it. This is about the life of Thomas Carlyle in a nutshell. And we'll next move to the major works of Thomas Carlyle. And there we will also talk about, in details as well. Thomas Carlyle's works not only offer valuable insight into historical events and figures, but also delve into social issues and philosophical musing. Remember, in UGC NET English, knowing the chronological order of Carlyle works can earn you some serious points. So, all right, my nerds, and let's take a closer look at the literary journey of Thomas Carlyle. Right. These are his work listed in order they were written, and it's quite important. And then later we move to we'll talk about in detail all these works. But anyway, first is Sartor Resartus. In Latin, it means the tailor retailer. It's a fascinating piece that explores the philosophy of clothes and society. So remember, the first and last work that you should always remember, Sartor Resartus, the Letters and Memorial of Jane Welsh Carlyle. But if you talk about major work, then the last will come something like the History of Frederick II of Prussia. So it's very important that you remember all the works in order if you really want one order, because one question definitely comes from that itself. So anyway, the second one is, you see, Wilhelm Mr. Apprenticeship, 1824. And here Carlyle's take on this classical work of Jonathan Wolfgang von Goethe's. So it's based on Goethe's Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. And then again we have the French Revolution, a 3-volume masterpiece dwelling into one of the most significant events in history, right? And again we have the Chartism. That question they have asked recently in our exam, and it is an insightful work discussing the Chartist movement and its impact. Then we have on heroes, hero worship, and the heroes in the history of 1841. It is a kind of thought-provoking exploration of heroism and its influence on history. Then we have Past and Present, which was published in 1843. It is a brilliant comparison of the past and contemporary society. Again, we have the Oliver Cromwell's Letters and Speeches with Elucidation, which was published in 1845. Remember the date. Carlyle's here. He examines of Cromwell through his own words, right? And again, then we have later the pamphlets, 1850, and it is a series of powerful pamphlets addressing various social and political issues of the time. Then again we have the Life of John Sterling, 1851, and it is a biographical work about the life of John Sterling, who was at that time a literary figure. And then we have the History of Frederick II of Prussia, called the Frederick the Great, which was published 1858, Berwin 65. Right, and it is a monumental 6-volume history of Frederick the Great. And then we have on the choices of books, which was published in 1866, and here it is his Carlyle's recollection and memoir. A noteworthy piece about the importance of selecting the right books. And again we have the Early Kings of Norway, also an essay on the portrait of John Knox, which was published in 1875, and again it is about Carlyle's exploration of Norwegian kings and an essay on John Knox. Then we have a Reminiscence, which was published in 1881, and here is the collection and memoirs of Thomas Carlyle. At the end we have Letters and Memorial of John Welsh Carlyle, prepared for publication by Thomas. That is a kind of Big title, right? You should remember it was published in 1883. So anyway, through the guess, like your what do you call, common sense, that Jane Wells died at the end of Carlyle's life, right? So it would definitely be the last work. So you can remember this particular work, that it's the last one. Sartre is his first major work. These two you have to remember. And remember, after that it only came the French Revolution, then it came on heroes, hero worship, past and present, and the later things. Mostly you get question from Sartre, then you get from the French Revolution. This time they asked about Chartism. They asked usually about on heroes and past and present. So so that's not the end. We ain't done yet, and it is now time to stretch this session like a piece of chewed up bubblegum, right? And now let's dig into Carlyle's major work with our magnifying glasses and a dash of silliness, right? So we'll just begin with Sartre. Sartre, remember the day 1833 and 1834. Very important date that you should remember, right? And first we'll just talk about its background and what is, as we know, it is Carlyle's novel. And it was written in 1831, but first hit the street as a serial in Fraser's magazine between November 1833 to August 1834. Remember the Fraser magazine that it was published. And the story claims to be about the German philosopher named Diogenes Teufelsdorch. I don't know how to say. If you know Germany, it's easy for you. German, it'll be easy for you guys. But anyway, remember the name Diogenes Teufelsdorch, that you should remember. And that means God horn devil's tongue. So who wrote a book called Clothes. This guy wrote a book called Clothes. And their origin and influence, and get this, some English reviewer or editor is there too. So another character is there, editor, who was editing his particular work. And that's going to be way funny. We'll just talk in the plots anyway. And it's all Carlyle's having a laugh at Hegel and German idealism in this parody-filled work, and he got some inspiration from the likes of Jonathan Swift, A Tale of a Tub, right, where kids get clothes they can't change but end up doing so anyway, follow the fashion, right? They just altered all that coat because that coat was divided into three brothers, right, in A Tale of a Tub, if you remember. Anyway, that is also important note that we'll talk about later. So again, this is also, Carlyle's own translation of Goethe's work, Wilhelm Master Apprenticeship, that also their important influence. Especially the work, The Sorrow of Young Werther, and of course, Faust, and also influenced him that big time. And Teufelsdorch even calls his crisis The Sorrow of Young Teufelsdorch. So remember the name, it's very important that it was influenced, because that question you might face. But anyway, let's move on. And remember, there was another that it was also influenced by Tristram's Shandy. Which Carlyle quotes and referred in his earlier letters. So much inspiration flying around, right? And also Sartre get translated in all sort of funny ways, like the tailor retailored. Remember, the tailor retailored is there, and there are so many names also. The title could be The Tailor Retailer, The Tailor Repatched, Clothes Volume, edited, and so on. So there's this old tune called The Tailor Done Over, and it might have inspired Carlyle's title. And Lord Byron play The Deformed Transformed might have played a part too. So quite a lot of inspiration that you can see. And also Goethe was the fan of play, and he was friends with. Anyway, just leave it. This is all about the Sartre's background. Now we'll move to the character. As you can see, we have the list of the character. This is our main character, who is the fictional professor at Weissenschitu University. Anyway, he wrote a book about clothes and philosophy. And then there is a character, the editor, the narrator, which reviews the book, expresses feelings and societal worries inspired by Carlyle's style. And again, another character is there, Hofrath Husserl. It is actually Hugh Shriek. eccentric and a scatterbrained fan of Teufel Rock and a reminiscence of Cold State Councillor of the time. Again, another character is there, Blue Mine, who is a German noblewoman who Teufel's Rock falls for. Her rejection triggers a spiritual crisis and possibly inspired by Carlyle's past love interest. Again, we have Togwood, English aristocrats, who becomes Blooming's partner, breaking Teufel Rock heart, potentially model after Captain James Winslow Philip. Then we have two places, one called Dumbrudge, a fictional village representing ordinary silent toil of common folk. Again, we have Vizinge 2, an imaginary European city full of conflicting influences, akin to spiritual hotbed of the 19th century, often referred to the don't know where due to its unpredictable nature. So that is the character. Now we'll move to the plots. And what is the plot actually? Well, so there is this long review called Fraser's Magazine, and there is this character, the editor, and this editor guy is like, what the heck am I reading? He's trying to make sense of this wacky book called Clothes, their origin and influences, by some made up German dude name, our main character, right? And this Teufel Rock dude is supposed to be a big sword professor of things in general at Vizinge to University, which literally means it is actually know not to wear, right? Know not wear University. And the editor's totally flabbergasted and he's scratching his head trying to connect the book ideas to the social issues in England and Germany. But man, it's like trying to put a square peg in a round table. And he even knows Teufel Rock personally, but that doesn't help him figure out this bizarre philosophy. So the editor's like, let me ask Teufel Rock for more information. But guess what? The Teufel Rock's office sends him a bunch of random paper, scraps, and all organized according to the Latin zodiac signs. What on earth is going on here, guys? It's very funny, and if you just read the whole summary, you will love it. Anyway, the review keeps getting longer, cause the editor getting more and more annoyed with this philosophy mumbo jumbo. He throws in quotes from Goethe's and Shakespeare's to back up his objection. It's like a literary smackdown there. And let's get into the book 2 of this wild ride. So our editor, again, dude has managed to piece together this Teufel Rock's life story, and it's quite the roller coaster. As a kid, this Teufel Rock ends up on the doorstep of a couple in the town of Entepfuhl, and his dad's a retired soldier and his mom's a super religious lady. So that Teufel Rock grows up with some serious spiritual discipline. Thanks to his mom's teaching, he spills all the deeds in fancy language, but the editor's like, dude, this kid got some serious pride going on, right? So Teufel Rock goes to school and he's smart, but he gets bullied too. Mixed bag, He's grateful for his education, but he's not too happy about how they treat people and politics. So that university, not much better, but he scores a teaching gig and gets in this particular, the fancy German nobles. Then comes this, interesting part. Now Teufel Rock meets this chick called Blue Mine, who he calls a goddess of flower. And it's just like, oh, she's probably using a fake name. Anyway, Teufel Rock falls for her hard, but she dumps him for some British dude named Togwood. Oh, what a heartbreak, right? That heartbreak sends Teufel Rock spiraling into a deep depression. He wanders around Europe, and guess what? He bumps into Blue Mine and Togwood on their honeymoon. Oh, talk about bad timing, guys. It's there. So anyway, Teufel Rock goes on and, everlasting made hating on everything human related. But then he has this moment where he finds peace in the center of indifference and realizes the value of life in the everlasting ye. So that was a quite, emotional roller coaster, I guess. So now the editor's like, all right, Teufel, you got me intrigued. I'm going to dig into your work with this new insight and see what else you have got to say. So that is all about the summary. Very funny. So in just simple words, if I can just brief it. So there is this main character, that Teufel Rock, who has written some big confusing book, and he gives for publisher, editor, and so that editor tries to read, and this thing he doesn't make, the manuscript doesn't make any sense. So he goes and he wants to know more about the author to write it more. But again, that was quite confusing, and at the end, what that editor decide that he's gonna now dig it up his book and anyway edit it. So that is all about this particular work. I hope you will remember the Sartre Risale, that silly story anyway. Then we have the French Revolution, and it's quite short. As you can see, the French Revolution, it is and full title is The French Revolution History by Thomas Carlyle, and it has 3-volume work, first published in 1837, chronicles the revolution from 1789 to 1795, and it includes the height of the reign of the terror. And it has been revised edition available by 1857. Then we have massive undertaking, drawing from diverse sources, unusual writing style, but authoritative account. Okay, so that is all about the French Revolution. You only have to remember the date, 1837. Then we have on heroes and hero worship, and it doesn't have so much things, and this is like, there is the characters. Remember the date first, 1840. It emphasized the power of heroic leadership, became famous with the French Revolution, organized public lecture to solve money problem. It is actually, I'm talking about Carlyle, and Carlyle excels at, as we know, public speaking, and his 4 lecture courses between 1837 and 1840, and last course focused on heroes, and lecture I've retained in the writing. There are some quotes like, the hero is a man of letters, books hold the soul of the past. These are the quotes. And belief is essential for fulfilling life, and the value of books in preserving history. Books as the greatest university of all, wisdom on adversity. And what are there in this lecture? So we have like 6 lectures. One is about the hero as a prophet, Muhammad Islam. Then we talk about Dante and Shakespeare, and that question they ask usually. And the hero is the priest, Luther, Reformation, Knox, and the hero is a man of letters, Johnson, Rousseau, and Burns. And the king, that Cromwell, Napoleon, modern. Simple: prophet, poet, priest, man of letter, and kings. Remember, and we forgot about that, divinity, right? So in the first lecture, he talked about paganism, Odin, Scandinavian mythology, and we have in the second lecture, he talked about prophet like Muhammad. Then we have poet Dante, Shakespeare, priest Luther, Knox, Puritanism. So many. So remember all these, that there are 6 lectures, and based on all these points and particular figure. Then we have past and present. Again, not much about, they don't ask about it. They ask about the dates and all the order that you have to remember. And as we know, it was published in 1843 in England and US together. Blends medieval history with the 19th century critique, written in 7 weeks as a break, inspired by Jocelyn of Brackland's chronicles, and contrasts medieval monk with modern leaders. Focus on reverence for work and heroism, criticizes the sham leadership of Carlyle's time, and insightful analysis of societal issue, combines history and contemporary observation. So this is, guys, all about our Thomas Carlyle, and I hope this session will help, and one question you can secure from that. So even if you don't want to watch, you can just go and read about it. We'll have the PDF for that, and also all the collection of the possible question that they will ask, and whatever the question they have asked before. And that PDF you'll get only where? In our course, and for that you have to subscribe. It's just only $9.99, and it's for like 100 most expected topics, at least 60 or 70 questions you will get from that series itself. And then you have so many mock tests, you have so many PYQ explanation. So overall, that package, we used to sell these separately, but for now we are just doing in one package where you'll get everything, and it's like guaranteed. If you just complete all the steps, all the PYQs, and of course mock test, you will be able to pass. There will be rapid fire as well. So remember, don't forget to subscribe the channel and also like the video. And of course, if you can enroll now, because that's the right time. You should start, because result will be coming this week. This week, I think 26 or 27, you will be getting the result. So as I said, please join the course and pass the NET. Thank you so much, and see you in our next most 100 expected topics. But anyway, thanks and have a good day. Bye bye.